Hey, welcome back everyone. I'm still in America, but I'm going to be doing another painting tutorial while I'm still here. And this week we are going to be tackling something decidedly more modern. I've had a couple requests for a modern type figure, but I didn't have anything really great for that until recently. But I actually came across something kind of perfect while I was at Salute, and that's what we're going to be painting. I'm going to show you. This is the figure that I have for you guys this week. It is, let's see if I can make it focus on, there we go. This is a sort of a modern type, sort of a military contractor type figure, sort of a Blackwater type guy or whatever they're calling themselves now. But these are the kind of fellows that are all over the world doing all sorts of security for all sorts of big corporations and, you know, working in private armies and whatnot. This particular figure is by Spectre Miniatures, which is a brand new company. It just got off the ground and they were at Salute this year, showing off some of their upcoming range. Actually, I'm not sure how many of these you can actually buy yet. They do have a Facebook page and a website, and I'm going to be linking to that in the comments below here. And they're also working on a Kickstarter. I don't know if it's Kickstarter, but it's that sort of crowdfunding thing to get their range off the ground. So I'm going to also be linking to that. So if you're into this kind of thing, this is really great because they're going to have a whole range of, you know, kind of modern contractors, militants, you know, just all sorts of people that are appropriate for sort of modern, sort of urban warfare. I think there's a specific focus on African combat, but there's going to be, I think, stuff that'll work for all kinds of, you know, different areas depending on, you know, your preference. As you can see here, I've already base coated him as usual with my gray enamel, and I've already done all of the flesh in my usual fashion. And you can see he's kind of wearing just very simple civilian clothes because he's a contractor. He gets to choose what he wears for the most part. He's got a really advanced weapon, but otherwise he's dressed like somebody on the street. He's got a hoodie on, some pants, some sneakers, a baseball cap. So you've got a lot of ways that you could paint him potentially, and none of them would really be wrong. But I wanted to use this opportunity to show you how to do another type of camouflage, which I know will interest some people, and that is digital camouflage, which is, if you haven't seen it, kind of pixelated looking, lots of square, tiny blocks. And there are lots of different flavors of digital camouflage. It comes in all different colors, all different varieties, 2-color, 3-color. It's really, there's a lot of room there for different patterns, and I'm going to be doing sort of a green type of digital camouflage for you, but you could, you know, you could vary it however you wanted, make it blue, there's even red, there's all sorts of really amazing color combinations out there. But because I have latitude with this figure, I'm going to be doing his pants in digital camouflage, and then he's probably going to be wearing otherwise more sort of conventional clothes. But, you know, this is nonetheless a good opportunity to show you that, because this guy could have potentially anything on, but digital camouflage seems like a good possibility, and I can show you how to do it, basically. So let's see, I think that's all you need to know. Like I said, I'm going to be linking to more information about Spectre Miniatures and their upcoming range in the comment box, so if you want to find out more about that, check it out. Next week I will be back home again in the Netherlands, so the painting videos are going to look more familiar like they did before, and hopefully it'll be a little bit easier, because I know these are not, I'm not doing this under ideal conditions, so I know it's not quite as easy to see what I'm doing, but hopefully you'll still find this tutorial interesting and useful. So why don't we go ahead and get started. Okay, so first I'm going to start painting the pants, and I'm going to begin by base coating them using a mixture of Vallejo beige brown and a little bit of Vallejo buff, but mostly beige brown for this particular base coat phase. I'm then going to go ahead and darken the recesses further by adding a nice thick wash of Agrax Earthshade all over the trousers. I'm then going to start highlighting the pants, and for this I'm going to be using a mixture of Vallejo buff with a smaller amount of the Vallejo beige brown in there to darken it up. And I've thinned this paint down a fair amount, and I'm going to be applying it pretty much everywhere on the pants, even down in the creases, because the last step made them quite dark, so I want to lighten everything up a little bit to avoid there being just too high of contrast between the creases and the other areas. But keep the paint thin here and apply a couple layers so that you can still have some tonal variations between the shadow areas of the pants and then the areas that are going to be receiving a lot of light. I'm next going to highlight the pants even further using just a coating of the pure buff color without any of the beige brown to tone it down now. And I'm just going to be applying this to all of the tops of creases and folds in the pants and to anywhere there's a lot of light hitting the model, basically. Now, as a final highlight on the base color of the pants, I'm going to use a mixture of Foundry Boneyard Light and some more of the Vallejo Buff, with more of the Boneyard Light in the mix in this case. And I'm going to be using this really to hit the tops of all the pants creases and any area that light's really going to be striking the pants. And I'm going to be applying it nice and thin and blending it out, maybe applying a couple of layers in places to get extra bright colors where I need them. And you may think this is maybe making the pants a little bit lighter than is, realistic or normal, that I've gone a little too far with the highlighting, but as you're going to see in the next step, this is intentional, and making the pants extra light is going to pay off very, very shortly. And now I'm going to go ahead and start on the pattern itself. Now, a little bit about digital camouflage here first and foremost. As I mentioned in the intro, it comes in a whole bunch of different colors, a lot of combinations, 3-color, 2-color. There's a lot of choices, but I've opted here for sort of a khaki base with a bicolor green sort of camo pattern on the surface. Now, if you look at digital camouflage, it's a lot of large forms, large color blobs, but what they all have in common and what sets it apart from other kinds of camouflage is the edges look really pixelated. They look like they're sort of falling apart or disintegrating into tons of teeny tiny little blocks or squares, kind of like the effect you get on a computer screen, on a TV. That's why it's called digital, basically. So that's tricky to reproduce at this scale because it's a very, very fine pattern. You've got these big blobs of color with the rough, pixelated, jagged edges, and then some loose, single blocks sort of floating in between. And the pattern coverage in this needs to be really, really dense and really, really, really fine. So the technique I've opted for here is very similar to one that I used in an earlier video when I was painting an SSP pattern camouflage, which in some ways is similar because it's a lot of dots. It's a very fine dot pattern, but this pattern, the digital camouflage, is basically like that, but it's more so. So I'm going to be using the same approach, and that is to be using a toothpick to apply the pattern, but I'm going to be going even finer. Whereas I was putting comparatively large dots into my P pattern, with this, the dots need to be super duper tiny. As a matter of fact, I recommend you get a little piece of sandpaper and you take the end of your toothpick and you actually sharpen it to an even finer point. And keep the sandpaper handy because as you work, the end's going to get worn down and flat, and you're going to have to keep sharpening it. And the color I'm using here for my first color is Vallejo Luftwaffe Camouflage Green. It's a really nice dark shade. And most of these digital camo patterns have one color that's dominant and then another that's in much smaller proportions. So you can see here, I'm just working all over the whole figure. Usually right after you dip the point into paint, you're going to have a great big blob on your end, and so when you apply it to the paint, you're going to get a big spot, which is not good looking for those little tiny pixelated edges you want. So I recommend when you first have a lot of paint on the needle, use that to form the centers of big blobs, and then once you've gotten some of the paint off, then you can go ahead and use that to form the finer blops and blips that are kind of around the edges, or sort of floating in the space, basically. For the secondary color in my camo scheme, I need a much lighter green, and I've made that by mixing some of that Luftwaffe camouflage green, a little bit of Vallejo khaki, and then quite a bit of the Vallejo buff color from my base. So you can see what it looks like there on my palette. It's kind of a mossy green color, and you want to apply this much more sparingly in much smaller blocks, a few loose floating things, but sort of apply it to make it show up well right near the edges of some of those big blocks of green. But like I said, don't apply too much of this. You just want smaller areas of this color, here and there. And I should say, this pattern is square. It's a lot of little squares, and when you use this toothpick, you're going to get basically little tiny circles. You're not going to get squares. But the problem is, at this scale, making actual squares is virtually impossible. It really is almost impossible at this scale, unless you're insane. But what we're relying on here is that the forms that we're making are so teeny tiny, you can't really distinguish between the square and circle, and from a reasonable distance, it gives sort of the same impression, the same effect. It's the same deal that we have with camouflage anytime in 28mm. You can't make a 100% accurate recreation. If you try to, you'll fail miserably. What you have to do is try to, find a way of reducing the pattern and basically creating an impression that's believable and, just gives the right effect, especially from a distance. And I know I reiterate this in every single one of my camo videos, but it's really, really, really true. I think most people who have problems with camouflage make the mistake of getting too hung up on details and too hung up on perfectly reproducing the pattern true to life. And if you do that, you're always going to, just not get satisfactory results. Once I've applied most of the light green dots, I'm going to go back in with the darker green once again and apply some more tiny dots in some areas over top of the light green areas that I just added. And I do that so that you can get extra added dimensions of color, extra texture, make it look like there's more layers and levels to the pattern. If you just stop right after you do the light green, it's not going to, it's not going to look like the pattern is as cohesive and like all the parts fit together. So after you do the light, go back in with the dark and just touch it up lightly and put a few little dots extra here and there to help bring everything together. So now our pattern is all done, but it looks a little bit flat now. I mean, we spent a lot of time highlighting the base, and that really, really helped, but adding all those spots in is kind of reduce that effect a little bit. So we want to do some highlighting, but the problem is a pattern at this scale, you just can't highlight. It's not practical. It'll drive you crazy and the results will not be good. So instead of trying to lighten up areas of this color, we're going to do the opposite and shade areas. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to take some Agrex Earth Shade Wash and we're going to do a pin wash, which basically means lightly adding, some wash to your brush and then, very selectively applying it into the recessed areas where we want to have extra shadows. And you don't want to load your brush up too much because you want nice, smooth, thin, even coats. You don't want any sort of pooling or puddling that sometimes happens with washes. So, as you can see, I'm going back in and applying the wash in all the recesses and under his pants, between his legs where I want it. And I'm actually going to go over each area several times to build up depth of color, get it darker and darker progressively. That's how I'm going to get those darker shadows instead of trying to get it all at once. So don't get discouraged if the first time you apply a little wash you see hardly any difference. You need to go back over it several times. But this is a great effect because this is going to take care of the shading and the shadow all in one go. It's going to, the transparency of the wash will shade not just the base color but also the pattern. And this is right here why I went higher with highlights on the base color than I normally would, because now that we're shading it back here, it's going to, it's not going to be so vivid as it was before, especially with all the dots over it, and that extra light color that we used initially will, automatically form a nice high highlight that contrasts really beautifully with the brown wash that we're applying down into all of the folds of his trousers. Now I'm going to base coat his hoodie. I'm going to keep that really, really simple. I'm basically just going to mix some of that Luftwaffe camouflage green with a bit of Vallejo German camouflage black brown to darken it up. And I'm using that black brown shade as my darkening color because I already have this sort of greenish yellow brown thing going on in the pants tonally, and I want to add another color to darken my green that'll be sort of consistent with that sort of color scheme that I've already begun with the camo pants. Now the hoodie, I want to keep it generally a pretty dark green. I don't want to get it too bright, but I do want to highlight it a little bit. So I'm going to start out, my first highlight is going to be just pure Luftwaffe camouflage green, and I'm going to apply that to most areas of the jacket, but blend it out so it still stays really dark in the shadows and under his arms. With that coat done, then I'm going to take that color and I'm going to lighten it up a little bit by mixing Vallejo khaki into it, and that's a nice sort of greenish yellow color. So it'll lighten it, but it'll stay consistent in terms of the same sort of shade that we want. So that's going to be my sort of second highlight on the hoodie, and I'm going to start applying that mostly at the tops of his arms and all the sort of folds and creases. And then for my final highlight, which is sort of an edge highlight and for the really bright areas, I'm going to take the Luftwaffe camouflage green, mix even more Vallejo khaki into it, and then even some further Vallejo buff, which is what I was using on the pants to get it extra light. And I'm going to use that kind of as my final highlight. But as I said before, I'm still not going to go very high with the color. I'm going to keep it reasonably dark. Next, I'm going to go ahead and base coat all the black areas on the figure using just Vallejo black. And I'm going to do that on the sneakers, his baseball cap, and also his sunglasses, the sort of wraparound glasses. I'm going to just put that black base coat on all of those areas. Now I'm just going to quickly highlight the black areas, and I'm going to do that by mixing just a little bit of white into my black and also a little tiny bit of the beige brown, and that is just to help warm those black shades up and work in some of the tones that I already have in the pants and in the hoodie. You know, that will make everything feel more cohesive, like it fits together. It's the same way that I often will add a little bit of blue into my black, just a different tone. In this case, I'm going to use the brown, and that, you know, that'll help bring everything together. You're going to want to put sort of a darkish gray highlight on all the areas, so on the shoes and pretty much all over the hat. And then I'm going to reserve a lighter gray shade, sort of as an edge highlight, particularly on the hat, so around the brim and sort of along the sort of seams that run up to the center top of his head. There's also a little bit of detailing to be done on his sneakers because they kind of have like white soles, white lacing, and then sort of just white trim or piping, I guess. Maybe sort of they're like Reeboks or something, so they've got, you know, just sort of like, you know, some designs on the side. And I'm just going to take all those areas and paint them using Foundry Arctic gray shade. And then after that, I'm going to go straight to highlighting them just using Arctic Gray Light, which is basically white. I'm not even going to bother with a middle color because it's such a small area. You don't really need more than 2 colors here, but just go over and, you know, carefully highlight all of those areas on the shoes. I'm now really quickly going to paint his sunglasses. I already base coated them black, and I'm going to use some green now to highlight them just to keep everything consistent. I'm using a bright green here, or a uniform green. It's Vallejo. It doesn't really matter, but you want a nice bright green for this. And I'm going to initially mix it into a little bit of black, and then I'm going to take just the pure bright color, and I'm sort of going to create a gradient effect, so it should be dark towards his nose, and then sort of getting lighter and lighter as it goes out. And this is really easy to do because this is such a small area. You're not really going to have to worry too much about blending. But you want the outer edges to be the pure bright green, and then just on the outer corners, at the very, very corner, take some of the green with a lot of white mixed into it. So a very pale pastel green, and just put a teeny tiny little stripe, and then maybe just a tiny, tiny dot of white at the outer corners at the top. And this will make it look like the glasses are shiny and reflective, but then they have sort of a green cast, which is something really typical, I think, you see with these type of wraparound shades. They're often sort of tinted a certain color. Now for his ammo and equipment bag, and I'm going to start out by base coating this again with the mix of beige, brown, and buff that I used sort of on his pants. I'm not going to start out so dark as I did last time, and I'm not going to apply a wash. I'm just going to do a straight up base coat to begin it with of sort of 50-50 buff and beige brown, and I'm going to put that all over the belt. I'm going to start highlighting the bag with some of the Vallejo buff with just a little of the beige brown mixed in to darken it slightly, and that's going to be my first highlight layer. And I'm going to be putting on pretty much all areas of this bag that, you know, well, except just like the seams and stuff. As it happens, this particular bag has lots of little seams and bulges and pouches on it, so you're actually going to be doing a surprising amount of work to paint this well, just because you don't want to be messy and you don't want to slather paint everywhere, so you have to be real careful to pick out all of the details well and, you know, get paint where it needs to go. So this is going to really be going in almost all places, not so much on the bottom of the bag, but that's about the only area that you're not going to want to be highlighting. I'm then going to continue my highlighting with just some pure Vallejo buff, and this is really going to be going only on the top surfaces, on the light areas of this belt pack. So a lot more sparingly, basically. All of the edges and the seams you're also going to want to be hitting here. And then finally I'm going to finish up in a similar way, but then with an extreme edge highlight using just Foundry Boneyard Light, and that really is only going to be used to emphasize edges of the packs and, you know, seams, and this is actually a significant amount of work, like I said earlier, because there are just a whole bunch of seams and edges and little tiny details on this bag. So my best advice here is, you know, take your time, be careful, keep your paint thin, you know, and just, you know, very carefully, you know, be neat about applying all these sort of lines to the, you know, the ammo pouch, and the results then you will get will be very good looking. Now the final thing to do here is going to be paint his gun. It's actually not very hard because it's a modern gun, so it's very dark, almost black. It's sort of a submachine gun. I'm going to base coat it using Vallejo German Gray with a little bit of a Vallejo Model Air black metal mixed into that, and that's just going to go over the entire gun. Once that's done, I'm going to take just some pure black metal and use that to sort of highlight the gun very sparingly, and then just a little bit of just pure Vallejo Air steel on some of the extreme edges where I would expect him to really be handling this thing a lot, but really go easy with the bright metal because these modern weapons are usually very, very dark indeed. And I'm going to finish off with a wash on the gun, first of the Nuln Oil to get some real extra dark black in the recesses, and then also just a little bit of the blue wash from Citadel 2, and that's going to slightly, you know, add a bluish nice gunmetal cast to the thing, but go easy on all of those colors, of course. And like I said, don't let your gun get too shiny because it's just not going to look right for this type of weapon. Okay, so that's our finished sort of modern military contractor / mercenary type figure, and I hope you found this tutorial for doing a modern kind of digital pattern useful. I know it's not an exact recreation of digital camouflage. That's virtually impossible because it's such a fine, complex pattern, and those square elements, it's just really almost impossible to really recreate it at this scale, but I think this gives a good approximation kind of what it looks like, especially from a slight distance, and that's really all we can hope for, is to get something that feels about right. And also I think this figure has been another great example of how to work on unifying the color palette of your figure, getting all the colors to work together and being consistent, which I know is something I stress constantly in my videos, but I think you can't really, you know, show that enough, because by spending a little time on making good color choices, making sure your colors are consistent, that they have the same tones in them, you will ultimately create a much more visually pleasing, attractive figure than if you don't, you know, put a little time and effort into thinking about those things. So please, if you enjoyed this, like this video on Facebook and share it with your friends. Also, leave me comments because I love hearing from you. I want to know what you thought. And you can also subscribe, which lets me know that you appreciate this video, that you're watching it, and also lets you know when I make a new one. It's just a better way to keep up. Next week, I'll be back in the Netherlands at my, normal workspace, so hopefully lighting and everything will be better. I actually think I mentioned that in the intro, but it doesn't hurt to say it again. So I guess I will see you next time.